Thank you for attending. Welcome to the Downtown St. Pete Mobility Study Community Conversation. Please note that you are being recorded, and we ask that you mute yourself when you're not speaking. You can also add anything you'd like to the chat, and a technology moderator will be monitoring the chat throughout the session. With that, Whit, go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Whit Blanton, and I am the Executive Director of Ford Pinellas. And today we're going to be talking with you about our downtown mobility study and some of the findings and some of the evaluation of the scenarios that we've tested to look at different modifications to the roadway network. And as soon as I figure out how to advance my slides here, there we go. We'll get started. So Ford Pinellas is the Metropolitan Planning Organization and the countywide land use planning organization. So we do transportation and land use planning countywide and regionally. And about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, the city of St. Petersburg and the Florida Department of Transportation and us came together to decide to fund and evaluate a study looking at different transportation options in downtown St. Pete. And the premise of this study, and you're seeing on this graphic the study area boundary that we're looking at for the study, is that downtown St. Pete has been growing rapidly. It's been transforming itself in amazing ways over the last 2 decades. And we have never really had a comprehensive look at the downtown transportation network. And the city approached us as it began considering redevelopment of Tropicana Field and had some input from various consultants and community leaders that said, you need to open up some of the grid street network in downtown. And there are some potential ways of doing that with 175, with 375, some of the one-way streets, so that the network is better connected and better able to support and sustain economic development throughout St. Petersburg and throughout the downtown area. And so we really wanted to first, what is our vision for downtown and the transportation network that supports it? How are functional and viable are these different roadway configurations that we should look at? And then which ones should advance into further study, or which ones do we think we have enough information and enough support from the community to move ahead with in the very near future. And so that's really what we're about today, is gauging your input, your feedback, and we'll be sharing with you some of our findings and analysis results. And then ultimately the technical analysis and the community feedback and input are going to determine the direction of next steps. And so the boundary area of the study area extends essentially to about 5th Avenue South and 5th Avenue North, and on the west to just beyond I-275 to 22nd Street. The dashed line that you see on the screen here is really where we're looking at the impacts of potential configuration changes to the road network in downtown. And we really want to create a street network that is safe for everyone, that's accessible for people coming both regionally and locally from neighborhoods and working within the downtown area. We believe in having a full complement of transportation options: transit, walking, bicycling, driving cars, and we want those to be considered. And so that's multimodal. And connected means that there's a seamless and efficient way to go from point A to point B without a lot of unnecessary barriers or conflicts or lack of options. And then we want a vibrant downtown. We think St. Pete's very vibrant today. We want to make sure that that continues, and we want to make it vibrant for everybody and have economic opportunity in downtown for all residents. So what we're looking at in the future with our crystal ball, and we've done some analysis of available land, future land use and zoning and those kinds of things, and looked at some of the development proposals. And today there's about 30,000 people living within the downtown study area of this project. We project that by 2045, there'll be another 15,000, bringing the population to about 45,000 downtown residents. And from a current employment of about 45,000 jobs to about 58 or almost 60,000 jobs by the year 2045. Now, what's interesting is countywide, we're expected to add about 100,000 new residents. So fully 15% of that growth will be in just the downtown core of downtown St. Pete. Something else that's interesting that we're looking at is about 43% of all the traffic crashes in the downtown study area occur on the one-way streets. And yet only about 17% of the street network is comprised of those one-way streets. So one-way streets tend to exacerbate crashes because they facilitate speeding. And the faster people travel, the more likely they are to have problems, either from side swipes or rear end or hitting pedestrians and whatnot. And so one way to make downtown safer would be to look at, do we need all of the one-way streets we have today? And that's part of the question that we hope to answer. Also, looking at regional travel into and out of downtown, we have to be very mindful that it is a regional activity center. And it is part of what makes Tampa Bay great, is having a strong, vibrant downtown St. Petersburg with all the destinations from the pier to Tropicana Field. And we hope to get back to Tropicana Field on Wednesday for Game 5. But what this chart shows you is that about 50% of the travel into downtown comes from other parts of Pinellas County to the north. About 18% comes from the south part of the county. And about a quarter of all trips you see in red there begin and end within downtown. And a relatively small percentage of trips coming into downtown come from Pasco, Manatee, and Sarasota, and a little higher percentage from Hillsborough. We know about 40,000 people commute across the Howard Franklin Bridge every day, either going to or from Pinellas County. So that gives you an idea of the type of magnitude we're looking at. 38% of regional trips enter or leave by 275, and they either use 375, 175, or the Fifth Avenue North ramps. And about 50% of the workers in downtown live less than 10 miles away. So people do try to live close to their jobs whenever they can afford it. And a lot of commuters come from homes to the north, northwest, and west. And then about 49% of residents in downtown work less than 10 miles away. So again, people try to be as close as they can whenever possible. So I'm going to transition now to some of the things we've learned. And through research and looking at other case studies, we know that two-way streets generally are safer than one-way streets. There are certainly ways to make two-way streets safer. And they improve business accessibility and they promote more livable communities. And how do they do that? Because you have more eyes on the street on a two-way street. You have cars going in both directions. They are looking at businesses and they can more easily access those businesses when they're on a two-way street. And if you're a pedestrian or a bicyclist, it also is easier to navigate a two-way street instead of a one-way street because there are more opportunities for crossing. And in bicyclists in particular, it's illegal to ride against traffic. So you're constrained usually with one-way streets and getting to your destination. And then from a highway design standpoint, we are looking at some modifications to 175 or 375 that could include partial removal, full removal, modification of the existing interstate spur and keeping it as is. And other cities have shown that that increases the amount of walking and bicycling. It opens up economic opportunities by making more land available. It can improve environmental quality because you have less pollution in some cases. That was the case particularly in Denver, which modified one of its interstates. And then increases neighborhood connectivity. So neighbors are not separated from some of their destinations by having a major wall and a barrier that interstates can create. And then we also talked with Sunstar, the ambulance company, and they told us that speed is not necessarily their most important factor because when people are in an ambulance and they're getting service. They want to have a stable ride. They want to have smooth and stable travel conditions, and they're not driving at top speeds, and they're not starting and stopping quickly. So they were not concerned particularly about not having an interstate to get to the hospital. So how our process will work, this is a very initial high-level look at the downtown network from a first view of, is it feasible to do some of the things that the city and our agency is considering. So we're developing project concepts, and they are at a very much a planning level. If we get through this study and there is community support for some of the projects and some of the ideas, and there is city council support, and then at some point there's Forward Pinellas support of the countywide transportation planning agency, then we would go into a next phase of engineering and design, or what's called a project development and environmental study. And that is a more extensive study that would take a few years and a fair amount of money to address a lot of issues like design considerations, environmental issues, cultural resource issues, and things like that before you undertake a major project. But for some of the projects we're looking at, they're not major projects, and they won't need to go through a PD&E or project development and environmental study. They will need some engineering and they will need some design, but they may be something very simple as a resurfacing or repaving the road and putting down different pavement markings and new signs, such as converting a road from a two-way street to a one-way street, or one-way street to a two-way street. Throughout both of these different phases, you would have a lot of public involvement and a lot of opportunity for people to shape the design and react to the findings and recommendations way before any kind of construction happens. But those are two paths that we've outlined to construction. And ultimately, we hope that coming out of this study, the city of St. Pete will look to advance some projects for funding. But if they're really expensive and involve highway removal and things like that, the decision is not just made locally. The decision is made first in Tampa by FDOT, and then if they're comfortable, then it goes to Tallahassee, and the state central office has to be comfortable. And then the Federal Highway Administration in both Tallahassee and Washington, D.C. would have to get involved. So you're talking a very long and extensive multi-year process for something big like that. But something local and small can happen maybe within a couple of years. And so some of the alternatives that we would look at for the interstate spurs are listed here. This is not a full list. It's just some ideas, but one thing we could look at is capping the interstate spurs so that they still exist and function as they are today, essentially, but they might be lowered a little bit, and you might have streets connecting over them into Tropicana Field, or you might have a park. You might have other amenities that get created with that use of space. And Seattle is famous for covering I-5 through downtown Seattle. Other cities have done it. Columbus, Ohio has done this as well. And other cities have removed interstates completely. So there's a mixed set of strategies we could look at. In addition, you could do a cultural resource assessment and identify some things that are important for the cultural identity of the neighborhoods and the community that previously was affected by building these highways. You could add park, open space, or new development to support employment opportunities for residents. So there's a lot of options that we'll need to consider in coming months or years as we take on some of these larger projects. So we're going to stop here and pause for a minute and get some interaction from you and ask, why are you interested in downtown St. Pete? So take a moment and select one or more of these options that apply. And Amy, you'll let me know when we're ready to move on. Okay, so we've got some results from that, and we see that we have some folks who work in downtown, a few fewer who live in downtown, and some who visit and play in downtown. All right, let's close that one and move on. Okay, so let's talk about some of the projects. And I'm going to go in a sequence, and we're going to start with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Street, or 9th Street as formerly known, and 8th Street, which are one-way streets south of I-375, south of 5th Avenue North. And what we're looking at here is possible conversion to two-way streets. And you can see from the image here that they don't have the same character that Beach Drive and 4th Street and Central Avenue and some of our other streets do, because they facilitate higher speeds. We do have a high number of crashes on these roadways. As I showed it earlier in the presentation, it's disproportionately high. They're not very comfortable for walking or bicycling, partly because the land uses along these streets treat them like high-speed roadways. And so businesses haven't really been attracted to a pedestrian scale environment here. And there's no bike facilities. They are two-way streets, both north and south of downtown. So it's only a relatively small stretch in terms of distance that they are one-way streets. And they've previously been considered for dedicated bicycle facilities and two-way conversions. So this is a discussion that's been going on for quite some time. And this is a map showing the extents of the potential conversion, linking historic Uptown neighborhood on the north and the historic Roser Park neighborhood to the south, connecting between 175 and 375. So one thing that we have begun to identify is we have crash hotspots throughout downtown, and this would provide for improved safety at 3 of those crash hotspots that are highlighted here on the map. We have also found that in our modeling and testing of the network alternatives, that when this is considered as a two-way street instead of a one-way street, that we have stable traffic flow on both streets. There is some additional delay, but that delay is caused because the speed of the roadway is lower, and not because of building congestion, but it's about to get through downtown. The worst case scenario that we've looked at is about 35 seconds of additional delay. And that's factoring in all the growth that's planning for downtown through the year 2045, or anticipated for downtown, I should say. And seconds of delay is something that you have to evaluate. Is it worth it? Is it worth increasing any delay on our road network to get safer roads and to get more economic opportunity and more connectivity? We are removing some of the diagonal streets that reconnect so those diagonals have created some safety challenges and access challenges. So that would be part of the package of improvements. And then again, we found that overall the streets will generally not be congested. And that's in the peak hour as well as throughout the rest of the day. So both AM and PM peak hour. There is some northbound congestion in the afternoon north of 5th Avenue North. But in a healthy functioning city, you often find congestion, and congestion-free downtowns are often dead zones of activity. So keep that in mind, I guess. And there is a slight travel time increase, again, less than a minute northbound on trips on ML King, and then about 1 to 2 minutes northbound on trips on 8th Avenue, getting through downtown in the worst of the worst PM peak hour in the year 2045. So again, this won't be, if you flip the switch a year from now and convert these streets, this level of congestion would not be there. This is really in the way outer years. And then what we would create is about 2.2 miles of more walkable streets with bike facilities, sidewalks, and other amenities for pedestrian and bicycle activity. And this would connect the bike lanes that are on ML King to the north that go all the way up to about 30th Avenue north. And then it would also connect to other facilities to the south. So you'd start to begin building more of a connected bicycle network that would also tie in with the Central Avenue and First Avenue bike lanes that exist, and tie in with the Sunrunner bus rapid transit project. So just to summarize, this project is improved safety at 3 crash hotspots, additional miles of safe walkable streets, a reconnected street grid that gives more economic opportunity and expands what's happening on Central Avenue to other parts of downtown. Less than a minute of travel time on ML King, a 1 to 2 minute travel time increase northbound, and it does not impact the overall network. And this is regardless of what we do with 175 and 375. So even if you take those interstate spurs out, the conclusions are the same with or without the interstate spurs. And I think that's an important takeaway. So we provide higher quality on-street bicycle facilities that's enabled by this conversion, better non-motorized transportation options throughout downtown, increased neighborhood connectivity, more business visibility and access, a design concept and traffic study for Booker Creek Bridge and the connection of the grid streets. And we would optimize the signal timing to help facilitate traffic flow, but at a more steady, slower rate of speed. So now we want to hear from you about what you think about this particular project. And we're asking you, are you strongly supportive or somewhat? Do you need more information and you're unsure? Or are you vehemently opposed by being strongly unsupportive of this? So go ahead and take a few minutes to respond. Okay, so a lot of you still feel like you're unsure and you need more information. And then there's a smaller group that is strongly supportive. All right, let's move on. And by the way, we're having these workshops throughout the month of October, so we'll have a lot more opportunities for people to weigh in. So now we're asking you why you voted the way you did. And even if you are unsure, you can still respond. And what are some concerns that you have that you would like to have answered? Do they fall into one of these categories? And if you pick other, you can type in a response. And if you do have questions, you can type them into the chat as well, and we'll go back and answer questions later. So if you think of something as we go through, type it into the chat. Okay, different concerns that people have here. Very good, let's move on. And now we'll talk about 3rd and 4th Street two-way conversions. This is the next project that we're considering. And these are, again, similar situation to 8th and 9th. They're not one-way streets all the way through downtown. We have higher traffic speeds on 3rd and 4th Streets. We also have high number of crashes. This gets closer to the core of downtown, and where you have more employment, more office employment and things like that. You're closer to the Beach Drive and the pier. These have also been previously considered for conversion to two-way streets. And these are the extents of the 3rd and 4th Street conversion. Again, 5th Avenue North and 5th Avenue South. And what we see on this map, again, that our testing using our model and tools are that overall with this, you will have some congestion on 4th Street, but generally there will be not an increase in traffic congestion. This would be a very moderate level of congestion. We have 3 crash hotspots that are identified here between 4th and 5th Avenue North at Central and then down on 5th Avenue South. And we believe that the conversion would help improve safety at these locations for all users. Less than a minute in travel time increase southbound on 4th Street. And again, that's 2045 with 15,000 more people and jobs living in downtown. And this would create about 1.6 miles of more walkable streets with bike paths and sidewalks and all the amenities that go with that. And generally stable traffic flow on both streets, less than 35 seconds of delay due to congestion. And again, that wouldn't be tomorrow or next year, that would be 20 to 25 years from now under this scenario. So this improves traffic safety at 3 hotspots, again, about 1.5 miles of more walkable streets, less than a minute of travel time increase southbound on 4th Street getting into downtown. And again, don't see much northbound, stable traffic flow on both streets, and it does not affect or is not tied in any real way to what we consider for 175 or 375. Those are independent of the one-way to two-way conversion. And I think that's probably because we are looking at different travel markets for the one-way streets versus the interstate spurs, different distance of trips and different types of users. And what this enables by looking at 3rd and 4th Street, the opportunity for higher quality, better designed on-street bicycle facilities, fully conforming to current standards, more viable non-motorized transportation, better transit service, better walkability, increased neighborhood connections, increased business visibility and access, safer crossings at key junctions. Maybe mid-block crossings would be considered as well, although the blocks are pretty small, you might not need to do that. And then the opportunity to look at a design concept for reconnecting the street grid here. So we're not designing these roads with this study, we are just testing what happens with the traffic. So there would be an opportunity to look at a more detailed design before any decision is made. And then the traffic signals can be optimized for better flowing of mobility. So we want to hear what you think about the 4th and 3rd Street conversions. So take a moment and let us know if you're supportive or not supportive. Okay, so we have about a little more support for 3rd and 4th, but a similar breakdown of some folks also unsure and needing more information. And then I think we have a subsequent poll. And what factored into your decision to respond the way you did? Okay, so ease of access, and you can see the other scores there: safety, redevelopment, and economic opportunity. All right, thank you. Let's move on. All right, now we're going to get into some bigger, heavier lift projects. And so one thing we're looking at is the potential modification or removal of I-375 on the north side of downtown. And this would have a full interchange with I-275 and a conversion of 4th and 5th Avenue North to two-way streets. So you would still have access to I-275, but it would be in a more slow, stable manner of an at-grade, lower speed roadway than what's essentially interstate standard facility. So currently the ramps separate the historic Uptown neighborhood and other areas, the ML King Business District, for instance, from downtown, limit some of the economic opportunity of that interaction. You have higher speeds. The 5th Avenue North and 9th Street intersection is a pretty tough intersection. And I know there's been some lane departure crashes because of speed, where cars have crashed into buildings in those locations. Unsafe walking and bicycling conditions. I was out there a couple of weeks ago observing, and it did not feel comfortable. One-way streets through downtown, two-way streets west of downtown. So there's an opportunity here to have some continuity of traffic conditions and visitor expectations as you come in. And that's always good, because if you're visiting for the first time or rarely, these one-way streets can be confusing and you wonder how you're going to get to your destination. And this currently does provide quick access to the northern downtown area and the waterfront. And it's interesting to note that decades ago, when there was advocacy for building 175 and 375, it came from businesses at the water who felt like they were struggling and they wanted to get people quickly from the interstate to the waterfront. And that was in an era when there wasn't much going on in downtown, along Central, and in those parts of the area out to Tropicana Field. There was no Tropicana Field, there was no Edge District. And so it was areas you probably wanted to fly by. Today, that's not really the case. So this is really asking about how do we unify downtown east and west and north and south. So you can see the graphic imagery here of 175. Again, we would maintain, or 375, we would maintain a full interchange at 275. And it would allow about 25 to 28 acres of potential new neighborhood connections. And what you see in the graphic in the orange would be new two-way conversion from one-way street. In the blue, you would have a lane reallocation for parking or bicycle facilities or transit. The green is a new street, so you can see the opportunity to reconnect the grid. And then you would have, in red, you would have realigned ramps, and then you would have a vacated roadway in gray. So a lot going on here with this one. And what we found is that you would have improved traffic safety at 2 crash hotspots, at 8th and at 3rd and 4th, 8th and 9th essentially. You would have 2.2 miles of walkable streets, bike paths and sidewalk. Now you would have some building congestion, and this is a bit of a concern that we see, particularly on 5th Avenue North. So it's really difficult to replace the capacity that 375 provides with 5th Avenue North, because the right-of-way is pretty limited in that area, and especially if you're talking about a two-way street conversion. And so you would have about 1 minute of travel time increase to St. Anthony's Hospital from I-275. So that relatively short distance, because of the traffic and buildup, you'd have about another minute getting into that hospital district. And a little bit of more than a 55-second, so about a minute delay at 2 intersections at 16th, due to more people on I-275. So the traffic does not disperse as well, and people trying to get to I-275 would have to navigate through 16th Street and 5th, and that does become a bit of a concern where you see that hatching area in particular. So 375, whether it's a partial or full removal, does give us a bit more safety. It does provide more walkable access. It gives almost 30 acres of land that could be used for neighborhood, park, redevelopment, new buildings, for jobs, all those kind of things. But there is some congestion that builds here. And again, this is independent of the one-way street to two-way street idea, except as it's packaged with 175, with 375 being removed. And what does this enable? Well, the first thing is we wouldn't do this overnight. This is a heavy lift that would require a lot of support by regional and federal and state partners. So you would have to go through that project development environmental study that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. You would have to look at interchange concepts with I-275. You would have to look at road reconfiguration concepts. You would have to go into a design that considers the environmental, park, and historic and cultural resource impacts, neighborhood impacts. And then you would develop design options, including a no build, including various build alternatives. And those would all look at different ways of reconnecting the street grid and what that use, so those 30 acres could be for. You do have a lot of redevelopment potential. And as people on this call know, there's a lot of growth and opportunity and need for affordable housing and things like that that could be looked at here. But again, we're not saying any of those things would happen. That would be a decision point down the road. You could have a dedicated bikeway between ML King and 16th Street. That's kind of a nice thing to fit the network together. And again, we would look at optimizing the signal timing. So what do you think about 375? And what concerns or questions might you have there? So are you supportive or not supportive? All right, now let's see how everybody feels. Okay, so we have our first somewhat unsupportive response, and then we have a couple of other folks who feel a little better about this project. And then again, an opportunity to tell us why you think that. Okay, and let's see how folks have responded. Okay, so economic opportunity and traffic and ease of access are all scoring there, and a little bit for redevelopment too. Great. All right, so let's, there we go. So this is partial removal of 375. And this is a smaller footprint on this project, but it has similar reactions to full removal. And so under partial removal, what happens here on this map, again, different ways of dealing with the problem of improved safety and access. A little bit less, but still about 2 miles of walkable streets and bike paths. But even partial removal would lead to some congestion on 5th Avenue North and 4th Avenue North. And you can see we've tried to get fairly creative here with how you access I-275, and those are roundabouts that are shown just west of 10th Street and before you get to 13th Street to facilitate the connections to and from the ramps with the one-way street conversion to two-way. So you have about 1 minute travel time increase to St. Anthony's. And I-375 begins and ends at these roundabouts on 4th and 5th Avenue North. So that could introduce, a little bit of an unusual factor, but it's quite common in other parts of the country to have roundabouts at the beginning and end of interstate on and off ramps. Carmel, Indiana comes to mind, and Denver, Colorado has done that as well. No changes to I-275 and no changes at the interchange at 5th Avenue North. So this would be a cheaper project than the previous one where you fully remove I-375. And so the summary here is, again, no impact to I-275, improved safety at 2 crash hotspots, and you can see a little bit less, about half the amount of potential neighborhood redevelopment opportunity because of keeping the footprint intact of much of 375 and some of the reconfiguration of the roadway. But we do have the same congestion problem. So the partial removal doesn't really do anything better than the full removal from a traffic congestion level. And so the project opportunities, again, we would have to get into the more detailed project development environmental study, but you would have this ramp access modification with roundabouts to transition traffic from a higher speed to a lower speed facility. and all the turns that they might want to make to get to places. And then you would have some improvement in multimodal transportation, but not as much. Increased business access, some redevelopment, a dedicated bikeway would still be able to happen, and optimize signal timing. So what do you think about this one? A little bit less of an economic opportunity and less footprint, but about a similar traffic impact. Okay, so a little less support on this one. And then maybe tell us why. So again, the same potential responses. Okay, and so from an economic opportunity standpoint, maybe not as much benefit as impact is how I read that. So it's about the same level of traffic and congestion, but doesn't have the same benefits as full removal does. Very good. Okay. All right, now we go to the south and let's look at 175. And you know the drill, so I'm going to go a little faster, but I'm going to cover this as well. So this project was first suggested back in 2016 when the Tropicana Field, when the city authorized a master plan of the Tropicana Field site, the 85 acres where the Rays play. And the idea was to turn Tropicana Field into more of a live, work, play, full-time destination that fits the character of downtown as a major activity center and not just a stadium. And the master plan included with and without a stadium. And so that's always been a conversation. But what else could you do with all that surface parking? So what eliminating I-175 was suggested would connect Midtown with jobs, restaurants, and amenities. This was back in 2016 when it was identified, to create a pedestrian and bike-friendly boulevard street instead of an interstate spur, and sort of helping heal some of the wounds from years ago when 275 and Tropicana Field impacted the gas plant neighborhood, which was a predominantly Black community and a center of retail and community vitality. So there's been significant public and business support behind this master plan concept for several years. But in order to make anything happen with the support of the Florida Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration, we needed to go through this exercise that we're doing today. So currently, this interstate spur does a pretty good job of separating Campbell Park and Roser Park and other neighborhoods from downtown. And not just those two, but all the way to the south part of downtown St. Pete. And people have not benefited equally in the economic opportunity and resurgence of economic vitality in downtown St. Pete. These are higher speed roadways with a lot of crashes on many streets, particularly in the transition from high speed to lower speed roadways. Very unsafe biking and walking conditions along these roads. A lot of confusion and difficulty getting to where you want. And if you've ever tried to get in and out when there's major events at either Tropicana Field or other locations, the First Avenues struggle with the one-way streets and getting to and through the lack of network in that area. But it does provide quick access to the southern part of downtown and the Innovation District and Old Children's Hospital and the Waterfront Arts District. So you can see graphically the illustration here of what the removal would do. And again, you would have two-way street conversion of 5th Avenue and 4th Avenue South. You would have a lot of opportunities to reconnect the grid that long ago disappeared, but you would still have some realigned ramps coming off the interstate because they can't work the way they are today. And then you would vacate the roadway to allow for economic opportunity or other amenities. And you can see the crash hotspots that we could help address there at 4th and 3rd. But this is different story than 375. We generally are finding here with this scenario that we have more stable traffic flow on both streets. There is a little bit of a delay in travel time, but that's because you're lowering the speed limit, and you're not able to go 65, 70 miles an hour on I-175, which you can most of the time because there's just not much congestion on that roadway. So this would introduce about a 35-second delay and under the worst condition, under the worst combination of network modifications. Got the one traffic hotspot. This creates about 4.2 miles of more walkable and bike and pedestrian friendly streets. 1 to 3 minutes of travel time to the hospitals from I-275. So that's not insignificant. But again, if you listen to the ambulance service, they're much more concerned about stable and steady as opposed to fast and rapid connection. But this is something to think about. The streets generally will not be congested because what we see here is that we have a lot more opportunity to move traffic on the 4th and 5th Avenues because there's right of way and there's ability to create this more of a true boulevard effect here. 8 new street connections help disperse the traffic. So one thing that we find is that the traffic is not overly burdening one road in particular. It's able to be accommodated by 4th and 5th Avenues, and then it filters through and disperses through the street network pretty equitably, and that's good news. This creates about 25 new acres of development opportunity where it's probably sorely needed to support the neighborhoods to the south. A new full interchange at 5th Avenue North would maintain the access to I-275, so you're not giving anybody any disproportionate access to regional destinations. So to recap here, full interchange at I-275 and 4th and 5th Avenue two-way street conversion. So they won't be this crazy one-way merge, weave, dodge to get in and out of USF St. Pete and the Innovation District. Full interchange maintains regional access. We address one of our big crash hotspot locations by the USF St. Pete area. A lot of miles of safe walkable streets, 25 acres of redevelopment. But again, we kind of get to what's the trade-off here? A little bit more traffic congestion, a little bit more delay, but generally speaking, the traffic handles this pretty well. And again, this is 2045 worst case conditions and very stable traffic flow. So what this enables is better transit service, reconnecting the street grid to the trop, more visibility for the redevelopment that happens at the trop under whatever condition, with or without the raise there, enabling 4th Avenue South and 5th Avenue South to become true boulevard streets that are inviting and appealing and more of a gateway into the downtown and into the neighborhoods. Significant redevelopment opportunities and enhancing business and economic growth, and the opportunity for fully protected bike lanes, which we don't have too many of in our region, and then optimizing the signal timing. So what do you hear? What do you think about this? Let us know. Okay, and let's see how people have voted. All right, so we get a little bit more strong support, and then we also have a strongly unsupportive. Fair enough, and tell us why. Okay, let's see what concerns people have expressed. Okay, and so again, this could be because you're supportive or you're concerned. And then if you check other, or if you want to type something into the chat, we'll see more detail. All right, thank you. Let's move on. It's a little slow to respond sometime. There we go. So one thing that we wanted to answer before we go to Q&A is, how does traffic from I-275 shift? So when we make these changes, the traffic that comes in and out of downtown on I-275, what happens under these? So if we don't change anything on the left side of this image, about 50% of the traffic currently uses 375 and 175. It's pretty balanced in terms of inbound traffic in the morning. When you remove 175 and 375, you can see that traffic shifts a little bit heavier to the 4th and 5th Avenue corridor, because we've got the boulevard there and we've got a little bit more capacity to move traffic in and out. Plus you have a little bit more of major employment uses on the south end of downtown that are more AM period, morning rush hour oriented. And maybe on the northern end, it's a little more PM oriented. And then with removal of only 375, you can see a more dramatic shift, obviously, to 175 because it's still there. And so you get about 2/3 of the traffic shifting, and only about 1/3 would continue to use the reconfigured ramps and 5th and 4th Avenue North. And then if you remove only 175, now you still have 375. So you almost do a reversal, and about almost 60% are now using 375. But you still have a pretty good amount, 42% compared to only 32% in the previous scenario, that would take advantage of that. And that's, again, probably because you've got a lot of that employment opportunity on the south side, southeast part of downtown, and then you also have more capacity on the south side. So we thought this would be helpful. So next steps, where are we going from here? We're going to listen to your feedback throughout the month of October. This is the first virtual workshop we're doing. And then we have an open house workshop coming up in about a week or so. And 3 more of these virtual meetings. So we're going to listen to the feedback we're getting. We're also dropping in and meeting with a lot of different groups over the next several weeks. And they won't get the full presentation like this, but we'll be pointing them to the virtual workshops to participate. And then the open house that I mentioned, where you can drop in, you can just talk to us and look at boards, and we can have more of a dialogue. So after all that happens, in October and November, we're going to create an action plan. And that action plan will include some recommendations for specific projects. It'll also include some recommendations against specific projects, or at least not at this time. And then it'll create a stepwise approach to how we start doing those things, whether we need a PD&E study or an engineering study, or what level of approvals we need. We do plan to go to the city council coming up in the near future and brief them. And then we will brief the Ford Pinellas board as well. And then ultimately we will seek a recommendation from the city council for action and a recommendation from the Ford Pinellas board for action. Now, there'll be some different levels of action. If it's something to do with just city streets, then that's a city of St. Petersburg decision. If it's something that requires regional decisions and addresses the interstate, then we're going to need Ford Pinellas as the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, to weigh in and make a recommendation. And then ultimately the Florida Department of Transportation can choose whether to take those direction or not. And so we're going to have to build them along as a partner for whatever we do. So I guess at this point, Amy, I would like to invite the staff from the city of St. Petersburg and Ford Pinellas, if you'd like to turn on your video, and we'll see what questions we have in the chat and see in the remaining minutes. And I know we don't have much time. Can we try and answer your questions?
Excellent. Please submit any questions you might have into the chat or into the Q&A feature. And I'll go ahead and get started with this question is directed towards you. And Christina, you might also have some insight on this about what we've heard already in some of the outreach that we've done and how we've incorporated that into our current action plan.
Well, we've heard a lot from people over the last year, essentially, but this is the first time that we've gone out with the tests and the results of our modeling and some of the findings with traffic. So before it was a little bit more general. And I would say we heard from a lot of people who like the idea of creating a more vibrant street by opening up the street grid, more vibrant downtown that serves the neighborhoods better. And I think there's been some support. We have heard from the hospitals, particularly All Children's, that said that they were interested in the process and they look forward to the results, but they had some caution and some concern about the potential impacts of losing high-speed regional and local access directly to the hospital. So that's been clear, but they haven't been opposed to exploring the concepts and looking at them further. So I want to make that clear. We've also informed the testing of scenarios and how we built the scenarios by what we've heard. And in particular, we heard from the community and from our stakeholders that we needed to look at 175 and 375 as standalone projects separately, and not just testing both together, but or not at all, but looking at one with and one without. So we built that in. And then we looked at the reconfiguration with a lot of input from our stakeholders. And Christina, if there's anything else you think is particularly important that I missed, please chime in.
No, I think you covered it all.
Okay. All right,
Excellent.
Any other questions?
We've got another question here asking about how this incorporates into the Tropicana Field development study and how that's been used to shape this.
Well, we all have done a pretty thorough review of the development proposals that came in from the city's solicitation of all the different concepts from the development interests who would like to have that project. And all of them show different aspects of this. And we've tried to be true to the general theme without looking at one proposal and picking that one or anything like that, of better street connectivity. And all of them have identified that as an opportunity with the redevelopment. But we're really guiding this on the initial master plan from 2016 that proposed the 175 removal and what that looks like. So it's consistent, I would say, with the master plan, and it's consistent generally with the redevelopment concepts and ideas. And I want to emphasize that we took those development concepts and ideas and incorporated that when we built the future employment and population growth in St. Petersburg. So that 85 acres in our scenarios, for every one of these scenarios, is a very vibrant, robust activity center district, whatever you want to call it, that has a mix of regional and local destinations, residential and non-residential uses. And we, again, we can't be super precise, but we broadly factored in what I would say, not a worst case scenario, but an aggressive scenario for redevelopment.
Excellent. I think that's all the questions we've got currently, unless there's anything else anybody wanted to add from the panel.
So again, just feel free to go to fordpinellas.org/DTSP, and you'll have more information about the study. We're going to get this. Is the presentation already loaded there, Amy? Or are we going to put it up there in the near future?
We will be putting up this presentation as well as a recording of this session onto fordpinellas.org/DTSP.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everybody for participating today. We got out right at 1 o'clock. And look forward to further questions. And if you want to email me or anybody with any questions, you have my email address. So thank you and have a great rest of your day, and go Rays.